people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Okay, we'll start with this. The big announcement, the big story that I think took all of us by surprise. Anthony Joshua versus Jake Paul confirmed for Miami's Kaseya Center, December 19th. Standing in for the pint-sized Gervonta Davis is the Watford giant, Anthony Joshua. As first reported by The Ring's Mike Coppinger, Anthony Joshua and Jake Paul have now finalized a deal for a heavyweight fight to be streamed on Netflix come December 19th in Miami. Joshua hasn't boxed since his fifth-round stoppage defeat by Daniel Dubois in September of last year, though Matchroom chief Eddie Hearn repeatedly teased the possibility of the two-time unified heavyweight champion returning before the year's end. Now the plan is for him to box Jake Paul 12-1 with 7 knockouts in a scheduled 8-rounder before kickstarting his 2026 campaign in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's capital city sometime in February. Paul was originally slated to face WBA lightweight world champion Gervonta Davis in the same city and venue on November 14th before the entire event was shelved on a week's notice after the unbeaten belt holder's latest domestic violence allegations. Per MVP's press release, their fight will be contested with 10-ounce gloves, while information relating to undercard bouts and co-main event details will be settled in the coming weeks. I think you can expect the same undercard you were going to get for the Gervonta Davis card. They're just going to move those fights and those fighters to this show. Remember that they don't have a lot of time. 5 weeks, just barely, counting this one, to promote this show and make it all happen. I don't think they're going to start from scratch. MVP CEO Nakisa Badarian has since told Sky Sports that Anthony Joshua will have a 245-pound weight limit restriction placed on him, having tipped the scales heavier than that in each of his last 5 fights, following an unsuccessful 2-fight series with undisputed champion Alexander Usyk. Paul was quoted as saying, "This isn't an AI simulation, this is Judgment Day, a professional heavyweight fight against an elite world champion in his prime. When I beat Anthony Joshua, every doubt disappears, and no one can deny me the opportunity to fight for a world title. To all my haters, this is what you wanted. To the people of the United Kingdom, I am sorry. The torch gets passed, and Britain's Goliath gets put to sleep." Yeah, not likely. I mean, if history is any indicator of things to come, it's not like Jake knocked out Nate Diaz or knocked out Anderson Silva, those retired MMA fighters. It's not like he knocked out a 56-year-old Mike Tyson or a recovering drug addict in Julio Cesar Chavez that I think he's now going to knock out Anthony Joshua. Anthony, meanwhile, acknowledged the lucrative opportunity on offer to make another quick night's work a la Francis Ngannou in March of last year against the famous YouTube personality. Jake or anyone can get this work. No mercy. I took some time out, and I'm coming back with a mega show. It's a big opportunity for me. Whether you like it or not, I'm here to do massive numbers, have big fights, and break every record while keeping cool, calm, and collective. Mark my words, you'll see a lot more fighters take these opportunities in the future. I'm about to break the internet over Jake Paul's face. Break the internet is right. My immediate reaction when I saw they made it official was, this is many times bigger than the Gervonta Davis fight would have been. The illusion of Gervonta Davis celebrity is kept alive by members of the media and content creators who grossly oversell him. Gervonta Davis, if he's an attraction, he's very much a local attraction, not an international superstar like an Anthony Joshua, who brings several different demos to the table. It's not just the Brits. Anthony's got fans all around the world. He is an international superstar and the ideal dance partner for a platform as big as Netflix. With over 330 million subscribers worldwide, this is in fact a much bigger show than the Gervonta Davis fight would have been.
Gervonta Davis is small potatoes compared to Anthony.
This summer, Turkey LL Sheik told the Boxing Voice on live stream of his desire to see Joshua versus Paul at some stage, purely to prove a point. Whether Anthony Joshua was truly as diminished as his critics suggest, or if Paul's divisive strategy in a ruthless sport could continue much longer. This afternoon, both MVP and Matchroom have both confirmed the same. Their proposed matchup will go ahead as planned at Miami's Kaseya Center, a sticking point. Their contrasting broadcast networks were ironed out in negotiations. Joshua signed a long-term exclusive DAZN deal in 2022, while cruiserweight hopeful Paul has been aligned with Netflix since agreeing to face Mike Tyson early last year.
That's a big part of the reason I didn't think this fight would happen, because Anthony fights exclusively on DAZN, but they found a way. For the money they're kicking out, there is an obvious financial incentive there for Anthony to box off platform, box Jake.
For what should be an easy night at the office, that if this is in fact a legitimate heavyweight fight, it shouldn't go more than 2 or 3 rounds. The Francis Ngannou fight didn't.
Nope.
How long did that last? 2?
2.
Because Francis had not been boxing as long as Jake Paul has been boxing, a little over 5 years now, you can give Jake Paul the benefit of the doubt that maybe he lasts a little longer than Francis Ngannou did.
A smidge.
But all the same, this fight should end the same way that that one did, with Anthony Joshua standing over an unconscious opponent, in this instance, an unconscious Jake Paul. Because if anything other than that happens, you know what people are going to say, you know what they're going to think, that Anthony sold his soul, the fight was fake, and this thing is rigged.
That's what people are gonna say.
In the 13 fights that Jake Paul has had, there's nothing there to indicate that he's ready to fight somebody like an Anthony Joshua. Many of those fights weren't even against legitimate boxers, so that now that you're facing one, Jake is supposed to lose, and not just lose, Jake is supposed to get slapped. And if anything other than that happens, people are gonna have their reservations.
I'm just telling you, they're gonna say that it's fake.
When it comes to Jake Paul and these type, like if he's fighting a real fighter, I always, in the back of my mind, I'm feeling like that it's a conspiracy. You know, I don't really know that a serious athlete that has worked their entire life to be, you know, world champions and, you know, set up legacy and all this stuff is willing to throw their career for a bag, you know, and give a fight, like lose to somebody like Jake. But I don't know. It just seems like it could be an underlying
What you mean
motive.
throw their career?
Because if you're gonna lose to somebody like Jake at this point, that to me that would tarnish his record.
His legacy. She's not wrong. Fighting Jake Paul for a massive sum on Netflix is not a victimless crime. It comes at the expense of a fighter's reputation. Because so many of Jake Paul's bouts are perceived as being staged, rigged, fake.
If you go in there with him, people are gonna look at you as just another dancing bear in his circus. Unless you beat him. Unless you knock him out, like you are expected to knock him out. But if this is a legitimate fight, why would Jake Paul put himself in harm's way when he's been so creative with the matchmaking? What would have left him so inclined to make a fight he doesn't stand a chance to win?
Desperation almost immediately comes to mind. Both Jake Paul, MVP, and Netflix had a lot riding on that Gervonta Davis fight, and the last thing they expected was that it would fall apart at the last minute. They needed something big.
And this qualifies. This is actually bigger than what they were already planning, though.
More dangerous. So why would a fighter who's been so careful with the matchmaking before take on a threat like this now? Desperation. It's gotta be.
They were desperate. And there are only so many opponents that would warrant the involvement of a giant platform like Netflix that...
He's very much out of retired MMA fighters, and he already climbed the mountaintop with an iconoclast in Mike Tyson. That I said it then. It doesn't really get bigger than that. It doesn't get bigger than Mike Tyson.
The Gervonta Davis fight wasn't going to be bigger than that.
But this will be bigger than the Gervonta Davis fight would have been. From the moment that that fight was announced, there was an ongoing discussion as to whether or not Jake and Gervonta would surpass the numbers for Canelo versus Crawford that happened on that same platform, and I maintained that would Gervonta and Jake's numbers eclipse Canelo and Crawford's numbers, and I maintained it wouldn't because neither of them have as many paying customers as Canelo, which was evident in the abysmal ticket sales right before the event was scrapped. The event was canned as a result of Gervonta Davis's latest domestic abuse fiasco.
Right before it all got called off, you saw that the tickets for that thing were not moving. They weren't selling like what you saw with Canelo versus Crawford, because as many people don't pay to see Jake or Gervonta as they pay to see Canelo.
Gervonta Davis is not the attraction that Canelo Alvarez is. Gervonta is not the attraction that Anthony Joshua is. This is actually many times bigger than the Gervonta Davis fight would have been.
Now, some people and content creators tried to blame the cancellation of that fight not on Gervonta Davis' latest domestic abuse case, but because Jake Paul was supposedly scared. He got scared at the last minute, called the whole thing off, so that he could fight a bigger guy?
A bigger, more dangerous guy who stands a better chance of knocking him out than Anthony Joshua. He called off the Davis fight. For that?
Yeah, right.
Stands to reason. Netflix didn't want nothing to do with no domestic abuser. No woman beater. That's why it got called off. That narrative never made any fucking sense.
That rhetorical question. Well, they already knew about Gervonta Davis's run-ins with the law in the past.
That's what some people were saying, that Gervonta Davis already had a long history of domestic abuse cases, that if that's the case, why do any business with him at all? And I maintained it's because he didn't have an open case.
That was all stuff from the past. But now that you're being accused of the same thing again while they're trying to promote this show, that's why it got called off. They don't want to be seen doing any business with you while that is going on. It would make them seem complicit with domestic abusers.
Another narrative that fell by the wayside, another narrative that was propagated by the usual suspects, wanting so desperately for little Gervonta to appear feared by the masses, while the masses are the ones calling him out.
Fighters have been calling that guy out for years. Nobody is scared of Gervonta Davis. Jake Paul.
He wasn't scared of no pint-sized Gervonta Davis. The reason the fight got called off is because Gervonta fucked up his own bag. He fucked up his own money, doing what he's been doing, putting his hands on women. That's why it got called off. And I don't expect that fight to now be revisited. Not now that they've had to swap out Gervonta Davis with Anthony Joshua. I don't know what becomes of Gervonta Davis because he himself had a lot riding on that Jake Paul fight. That was intended to be his retirement check, his exit strategy from boxing. And I don't know what's going to happen now with the domestic abuse case and whether or not he can settle it. If he can settle it, does he keep boxing?
I don't know, and I don't care.
Fuck him.
Gervonta Davis is out and Anthony Joshua is in. Onward and upward. But it's only because Jake is desperate.
They needed something big to replace Gervonta Davis with, and this is big. This is actually bigger than that would have been, but it could come at the expense of Jake Paul's health. Why would he put himself in harm's way?
He's desperate.
Jake Paul needs to fire his advisors, his people that tell him to make these fights, because that's not good. Did Jake Paul not watch the Ngannou fight? Like, do you know what? Like, obviously there's making money, but then at the same time, it's like now it's absurd. I don't think Jake Paul's bad for boxing. I think he's good. I like Jake Paul. Like, you see what he's doing with women boxing as well. I like Jake Paul. And I'm not saying he shouldn't take the fight. I just feel like he needs to weigh the outcomes. Like, I don't know what, the 50 mil, and then my health, like cars and watches, can't say my name. Like, is it worth it? And if he wants to fight Anthony Joshua, then, do you know what I mean? It's not my life. Go do it. But like, me personally, if I was Jake Paul's brother, I'd be very worried.
Unbeaten up-and-comer Moses Itauma has serious reservations about the repercussions of this fight on Jake Paul's health. But it kind of speaks to that old question.
Would you let Mike Tyson punch you in the mouth for $1 million, $8 million, something like that? You know, the kind of stuff you get around your friends. You ask yourself those hypotheticals. would you let Mike Tyson punch you for a large sum of cash? It's the same logic here. Would you box Anthony Joshua for 40 million, 50 million?
Which is a lot more than a million, a lot more than 8 million. Would you do the dance with Anthony for
Money.
life-altering money?
Would seem we have our answer.
If Jake Paul is deciding to now put himself in harm's way, more so than he ever has in the past, it's because of life-altering money, it's because he's in a pinch, and they need a big name, they want to make a big fight, they're desperate.
The Gervonta Davis fight fell apart, so now they're desperate. That's why they might be doing this. If this is a legitimate fight, a for real fight, that's why they might be doing this. If this is a for real fight, why is Anthony getting involved? The financial incentive is obvious. He's going to make a vast sum of cash to go in there with a novice boxer who stands next to no chance of knocking him out.
Netflix is paying him through the nose to do it. It allows him to shake some of the ring rust off before his big plans early next year. I'm sure you all have seen the reports that Turkey LL Sheik has big plans for Anthony early next year, February more specifically. He's supposed to be boxing someone in some big show. This allows Anthony to get out there under the hot lights, shake off the ring rust, make a fuck ton of money, then move into whatever he's moving into early next year. It's very obvious why Anthony might take a fight like this on.
Why isn't he being castigated for it like Gervonta Davis was being castigated for it?
Because he's not using it as an exit strategy. He's not swapping out fights that he should be having for Jake Paul like Gervonta Davis was doing. I told you, nobody would have been mad at Gervonta Davis for fighting Jake Paul if he had already fought Vasyl Lomachenko or Teofimo Lopez or Devin Haney, Shakur Stevenson. People's biggest problem with Gervonta wasn't the Jake Paul fight, it was all the other fights he didn't have and wasn't gonna have.
That's why they were mad, because they knew if he fights Jake Paul for all that money, he's definitely not going to fight all those other guys. That's not what Anthony's doing. Anthony's not using Jake Paul as an exit strategy. He's using him as a warm-up fight, it seems.
A tune-up before he kicks off a big 2026 campaign.
So if the attitudes for one fight are different to the other, that's why. Anthony is not using Jake Paul as a retirement check. He's not using him as an exit strategy or a substitute for other fights that he's supposed to be having, in tandem with the optics that Jake Paul versus Gervonta, a cruiserweight versus a lightweight, that's a goddamn circus.
You guys aren't for real. That wasn't even a for real fight because a real commission wouldn't sanction it. Whereas Anthony and Jake, a cruiserweight versus a heavyweight, there's no need for special designations or made-up categories.
Cruiserweight versus a heavyweight is run-of-the-mill. That's pretty normal. That's how it usually goes. The optics are different. The intention is different. So that if Anthony Joshua is not being castigated like Gervonta was being castigated, that's why. It's very obvious. He's not using Jake as an exit strategy.
Apples to oranges. I was wrong, ladies and gentlemen. I was wrong. The last thing I thought was that this fight would actually materialize. I was convinced it would not. There's just not enough time to put it together. Anthony Joshua's exclusivity deal with DAZN, letting him migrate over to Netflix. I was convinced this won't happen. Jake's not crazy.
I was wrong.
If this is a real fight, and that's what it looks to be, yeah, Jake has lost his fucking mind.
No. He didn't lose his mind. He found his wallet. This is like those questions that grade schoolers ask each other. Would you let Mike Tyson punch you in the mouth for a vast sum of money, for a lot of money? In Jake's case, he's letting Anthony do it for a lot of money.